Good morning. My name is Sandi Pirrelli. I'm the illustrator, author of the new Behind the Garden Gate and Main Street USA adult coloring books that Prima's printed and published on my behalf. Today I want to work with Prima's Watercolor Confections. These are the wonderful little trays of color that are very condensed pigments that work just beautifully when you want to add some vibrancy and brightness to coloring book pages. And it also makes a fun substitute or change up from using colored pencils or markers or any of the other media you might use. Watercolors do have certain characteristics that are different maybe than something that you've used. So here I've got a finished page of hibiscus, and this was all done in watercolors. So I'm going to show you how we achieve this result working off of a blank page. Now, if you're using a coloring book of your own and you have a thin paper, I have a little trick to use that makes it a lot easier to work with paper that is not watercolor weight or even cardstock weight. And that is take some paper towels and fold them up into a square, maybe 3 or 4 layers thick. Put your page down on it and then just tape down on the corners outside of the area that you're going to color in. This acts like a blotter, so if you've got water seeping through, and it has something to absorb, and it keeps the color from spreading out into the areas that you don't want it to. So that's just kind of an FYI on how to work with paper that's not as heavyweight. The book, Garden Gate, here's an example of it, or the cover, it's all printed on a heavyweight watercolor paper. And the pages are perforated so they can just easily come out. You can just bend and tear out and your page is ready to go. I choose not to tape mine down because it's just my preference that I kind of like to turn things around. So I can always keep the black line in front of where I'm working. It allows better control. Now, one thing if you are using watercolor confections for the first time is that Prima includes this handy little color chart. And it's a great thing to use so you can keep track of the colors that you're using. And they're all numbered. So for example, this is number 13. And so I can tell exactly what the color is. I want to put a little spot here of each one of the colors that are used. And you can go through all of this here with each color number, and it makes a handy reference. So that's 13, 14. This is color number 15. And as you can see, I've done this with all of the watercolor confection pads, so you know exactly what color you're reaching for. It makes it a little easier to keep track of things. Another hint that I've got on this is if you've got a black Sharpie marker, after you unwrap these color cubes, just write the number here on the bottom in case you mix them up in the tray, like I've been known to do. So let's get started, and I'll show you some of the techniques that are unique to watercolor and that give you these finished results. Sometimes I'll start with the background first, but in this case I want to show you how you can get different effects to make the flowers. So let's start with this flower that's yellow. And in order to get a nice transition of color, see how this goes from yellow and fades smoothly into orange? That's different than the technique here, which has a definitive line where the color changes. So let's start with this first. And I'm going to use yellow on my edge. Now I'm using a regular watercolor brush, but if you prefer, you can always use, one of the Prima watercolor pens too. They both have advantages, but in the end, the result is the same either way. So the first thing I want to show you to do in order to get that soft blending, actually here I think I'll go ahead and use the watercolor pen. You need to squeeze it, just a little bit so the brush is wet. And working one area at a time, I'm going to make this entire area wet with water. This is known as a wet on wet technique and allows the colors to blend together. So I've got yellow on the brush, and here I am going to just go like this. And I'm not a big stickler to say you have to stay within the lines. Don't worry about it if it goes out a little bit. It won't hurt. It adds kind of to the painterly quality of what it is that we're doing. Now, see how the yellow just slowly works its way up into the area where you put the water? This is the look we want to now go back and get the orange that we want to blend into. So let's put just a little bit of orange on the brush. And since this area is already wet, all I have to do is put a little bit of orange up in here and let it blend down into the area that's wet and just soften it like this. If it went a little bit further than you want, you can go back and you can put yellow in. See how it pulled back the orange color? And see, you have a beautiful gradation of color shaded, which is real difficult to do with pencil, but you can see how quickly and easily it's done with watercolor to transition from yellow to orange. And because it's watercolor paper, it stays wet for, a fairly long period of time, so it's always workable. Now I'm going to go to this next petal, and you can see I've still got a little bit of yellow left on here, but that's fine because we want to have shadows and lights as we keep working on this. So once again, let's put some yellow at the edges because this is a naturally colored hibiscus. There is a variety that has yellow edges, orange centers, and bright purple and magenta areas in between. So, see, let's go back now and let's make this one yellow. And you can work neighboring petals a little at a time. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at a flower is which one of these petals is in front of the other one. And that's, one is sitting in front, you want that one to be a little lighter than the one that might be next to it, or the one that's way underneath at the bottom of the flower. So now, working here, so again, let's get some yellow here on the end of the flower, or the edge of the petal, I guess. And look, oops, I went outside the line. But you know what? Not a big deal. Let's get some orange on here, and gradually you'll see the flower begin to take shape. This is a little more intense than the area that I have here. And actually, I kind of like that contrast. So since this is still damp, I'm going to go in and put a little more of this orange here. And that's what I love about watercolor is you can just change it as you go. So, and there's no right or wrong way on how this color goes down. This petal here, I'm going to turn this a bit. Okay, so this petal of all the flower here, this one is the one that's up on top the most. So I'm going to want this petal to be lighter than all the rest. So in this case, I'm going to start now with a clean brush with fresh water on it. And I'm kind of sloppy this morning, aren't I? Yeah. Paper towels are a wonderful thing to have. You can blot it quick. You know, if it really went into an area that you don't want. Like, it won't erase completely, but it'll at least get some of the color up for you. All right, so going back and putting some yellow in here, or actually clear water, sorry. Let's get some yellow. Can you see what it is that I'm doing here? Let me move that over so you can see. And keep in mind that these watercolor confections are highly concentrated and only a little bit of water is necessary. Sometimes a common mistake with people beginning with watercolor is to use too much water. You don't need that much, and especially if you're working with a concentrated pigment. So I'm going to get this edge here. And I'm looking at this petal thinking, you know, I want this to be a little softer blend. So I'm going to put some yellow back here. And see, it just kind of makes it smooths out where the colors blend in to each other. All right, while this is still wet, then I'm going to go back now and put some orange in. And you can work all the way around here, this way. How are you doing with your flower? Are you guys following along or working on your own? Okay, see, we're almost finished. And that's another thing about watercolor is you don't have to use a lot of pressure, you know, to get an intense color, but that's different than colored pencils. And it actually goes and covers an area pretty quickly. So if you want to have quick results, you know, I recommend using watercolor because it doesn't take as long to do as it would with color pencil. Now I want to get this flower finished before we move on to the next, so I can show you how you get some additional details in here and hope that it dries, you know, fairly soon. I've got a blow dryer here that I may want to put on here just so we can get some progress instead of having to wait for the paper to dry. All right, now going to put a little bit more clear water on here and get some orange on the brush. See, isn't that neat when you hold it down? See how you can just get it to flow right into where you put the water. On something like this, let me point out to you, which is a little different than my sample here. is as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself, I actually kind of like this little bit of white showing through. I would not go for perfection. I think that kind of adds some character to these petals. So I'm going to let that white stay and show through. Now, see if this is working so I can. All right, I'm going to dry this a little, and you know, you can do the same thing. If you want to just work one area at a time, it's just by touch, if it's dry enough. Oh, that's good, that dries it quickly. Now, to get this detail on here, because real hibiscus flowers, if you're familiar with them, do have heavy veining and shows all the pretty lines that are in there. So I'm going to use a small round point brush, and I'm going to move to use a darker orange, which is over here in one of the Tropicals paint pads. And once again, the color is very concentrated, and a round brush is good because you want the little fine tip. You might even use a smaller size. And, you know, you can twirl the brush point, and then, let's see, this is nice and dry to the touch. Just starting here and working towards the center. Just add some defining lines here. Shaky hands are okay because it gives it that organic feeling to it. And this is another great way to just add depth and shading to the flower. And this can be used on almost any flower, any variety you like. It's just a nice way of layering color and adding some definition to the shape. Here we go. Let's keep it going here all the way around. All right, I think you get the idea of how that works. You can put as much or as little on it as you want. I'll finish up this section, and then we can move on to the middle of the flower. All right, since once again I'm going to go ahead and follow this same color arrangement. And now that this area is nice and dry, I don't have to worry about the color I'm adding bleeding off into this edge. There may be times when you're painting that you do want it to do that, in which case you would wet the entire flower and just let the colors bleed into each other. But because I already have a black line here sort of defining where I want the color to go, I'm going to more or less stay within these lines. And that's, you know, what you're going to find when you're working with a coloring book is that black and white line art, you want to work with it and use it to the advantage, not try to work against it. So I'm going to put some pink in here and take it just up to the line here. So I've got the center of this hydrangea flower with some pink. Now, I'm looking over here at the Classics color palette, And I think I want some really intense fuchsia to include in here also. Yeah, I think it needs a little more brightness here. And this is, I just love the properties of watercolor because you can make it lighter, darker, much easier to work with than it is not struggling with color pencil, but that's mostly pressure. You know, a light pressure gives you a lighter shade, harder pressure, darker shade. But this is relatively easy to get the control that you want. All right, so now I have a bright fuchsia edge, and in the center, I want to go ahead and use a deep purple. And this is where the color chart comes in handy because it looks to me like I have maybe moved my colors around. Well, here's my purple. And I'm going to put a little water directly on my cube, kind of let it soak for a minute. And even though this color is still wet, I'm going to work just from the center outward so I don't have too much purple bleed into the pink. But as you can see, I can go up to the line and not go over. But even if it should bleed into the other color, hey, it's just a happy accident. See, I'm going to do this intentionally now. So you can see, it doesn't hurt it at all to go outside the lines a little bit. Now let's compare and see. Is this flower as bright as you want it to be? I think so. I don't know that I need to go back over anything. I think maybe we'll just move on to work on the stamen and some of the leaves and see how that's doing for you. Well, I know in nature that this stamen is usually a golden yellow. These are kind of yellow, and the tips can be yellow or orange. I'm going to make this little tip yellow here. And I'm going to kind of randomly put some yellow on here, and maybe just a little bit here. One thing I did when I was doing this black and white line art for Behind the Garden Gate was give you a little bit of cheats in the way of shading. So you can see that by adding these lines here, texture lines here, it already gives you a guideline for where you would want the shadows to be. So I'm going to use the yellow here, and then I'm going to go over to this Tropicals and get some of this gold in here so it shadows the stamen area. And please note that I'm not getting all rigid about, no, I need to stay within the lines or anything. That's one of the things that I really like about watercolor, is it doesn't hurt anything to go outside the lines, as I just intentionally did there, just to get a little bit more of a shadow going. Now, if this is dry, Now I might dry here just a second to do this. This is one of my favorite tricks. This is an illustration pen. These come in different size points, and they're black permanent ink. And I just like to go in when I'm done and say, I'd like a little bit more lines here, and maybe through here, and go along this way. Because once color is added, you may see some things that, I might like I like this idea of showing a little bit more line than was used on the original illustration. And I think illustration pens are great for this. Or if you're painting away and suddenly see, I wonder if a line is missing. I happen to know that a line is missing on this illustration. See where the stem is of the plumeria? I forgot to get a spot right here where the stem continues. So I know I have to add that in with my illustration pen, if I want it to be true to life. Otherwise, this stem would be floating in the air. Well, we don't want that. All right, so just adding a little bit more hatching on here to give the flower some final shaping. And this is how you work with a wet on wet technique, and then finish up with a little bit of lines being added after it's dry. Now this flower here is done with a dry technique, and that means that or wet on dry rather than wet on wet. This means that I am not going to wet any of this area of the flower first. I'm going to use watercolor only to achieve, instead of a gradual change of color, I'm going to have definition of where colors go instead of shading. So using the watercolor brush, and I want kind of a coral color on that, so I'm taking these colors from Pastel Dreams, and I'm going to add some water, just a few drops, to each one of these colors. So these colors are ready to use with moisture when I am. So I'm going to take Lemonade. That's the lightest color that I want. Always go from lightest to darkest, because you can always add color to it, but you can't take it off. So I'm looking at this hibiscus flower, and I see that this part of the petal is probably more in the foreground than these other petals. So I'm going to start with where I want the light, and I'm going to fill this in and leave just a little bit of white space, which is going to be the highlight on that petal. And I'm going to move to the next one. And I'm going to need more color here. And I'm going to paint all around this flower using the lightest color. Okay, here's more where I'm going to want some light. And here's another spot. So this is kind of facing higher than the others. So I'm going to leave a little area of highlight right here. And maybe again on this one too. All right, since we don't have a lot of time, here, I'm going to go ahead and dry this spot again. But you can go ahead and let yours air dry. You can move on to working into another part of the picture. Or go get yourself a drink of water, or go help the kids with their homework or something while this dries. It's going to take a little while longer, I guess, to get this dried off. All right, and now I'm going to put in my darker color because this is a dry on dry technique. And this is one of my darker petals. So I'm using now the color Rose to put in where I want the darker colors. And as you can see, instead of the colors blending together, as we intentionally were doing here, these colors are staying separate. Okay, this is kind of the shadow behind here. And this is going to be darker because that petal is behind that one. Now the center of this flower is going to finish up just the same way this one did. You might want to use a magenta and a purple. The stamen goes along the same way. And then I think I'll show you how I work this one leaf. You know, using, this is actually a combination of both wet on wet and wet on dry technique. So you can see how I chose to do the leaves. And then you'll be able to work the rest of this picture and finish it up, this one or another one that you might be working on. So you have an idea now of how to do flowers using two techniques. And then I'm going to show you how to do a leaf using a mixture of both techniques. Now, my light is coming from this direction, which means for this leaf, I'm going to have an area that I want to have lighter than the rest. Now, that one, I didn't realize I had that much color in my brush. So I'm going to go back to a handy paper towel, and I'm going to pick that up real quick. Get my brush rinsed. See, if you do it fast enough, you can kind of fix your mistakes as you go. All right. I'm going to have some sunshine coming down on this leaf, so I want to put a little bit of yellow here in the center where I would have light. And then I'm going to take green. I think I'm going to work with with this shade. And I'm going to put it around here so it blends. See, I picked a yellow-green, so it's going to blend around with what I've done there. And because it's still a little bit wet, I'm going to let it blend on this edge and not so much on this edge. And then I'm going to move to the darker green. As it would naturally transition here. And see, I can put one color right on top of the other color, and I can work it out to the edges. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a little bit of this turquoise color that I have over here, and I'm going to let it mix with this green. I actually like to mix colors directly on the paper that I'm doing. You can use these trays if you want to mix, if you need a lot of color that you don't have available here. But that's one of the attributes about watercolor, is I can mix it right on the page if I so choose. And that kind of gives you a way of showing and adding dimension to the leaf as it would naturally occur, giving you a bright spot of sunlight and putting color around the edges. So I think that's quite a bit of technique to be showing you today. I will be joining you again when I either finish up the rest of this page, show you how to do some background techniques, or maybe we'll move on to something else on the next show. But I hope you enjoyed this so far, and look forward to seeing anything that you may post on the Coloring Society with Prima. It would be fun to see the pages that you do there. I hope you visited that site or have become a member of the Coloring Society. Thank you very much for the time you spent with me today. I enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye. Mm-hmm.